What turns a local ghost story into a national obsession? Why does the image of a headless horseman still make our hearts beat faster 2 centuries later? Today, we will dive into the archives to uncover a disturbing truth. The most beloved American horror story is not fiction. This is a documentation of real horror preserved in the literature like a sample in formaldehyde. I am your guide through these shadows. If you are hungry for knowledge that is not taught in textbooks, join our Academy of Seekers of Truth by signing up, because some education can only happen in the dark. The question is not whether there is a headless horseman. The question is why we desperately need it to exist. Prologue, a whisper in the blood. Before we turn to the archives, we must recognize one fundamental biological fact. The fear of beheading is written into our DNA. The brainstem, the most ancient part of our brain, recognizes decapitatus, the state of headlessness, as the absolute, final collapse of existence. This is not just death. It is the destruction of the very control center, the command center of consciousness. When our ancestors first saw the head separating from the body, they saw more than just the death of a comrade. They saw the desecration of the very structure of life. This primal horror is the soil on which all the legends of the Headless Horseman grow. This is not a cultural construct. This is a neurological imperative. Chapter 1. The European Wound, Why We Fear Incompleteness. To understand the American phantom, we must return to the roots, to the blood-soaked fields and dark forests of Europe. But our journey begins not with folklore, but with court records and medical treatises. 1.1. The Anatomy of Execution. In medieval Europe, beheading was not just an execution. It was an elaborate spectacle of power and spiritual destruction. The executioners underwent years of training to master the art of one precise strike. 14th century manuscripts, such as the Book of the Executioner from Nuremberg, describe not only the technique, but also the spiritual consequences. And the soul, deprived of the gates of flesh through which it could ascend, will wander between worlds, finding no rest. Beheading was a metaphysical crime. 1.2. The Archaeology of Fear. The Brothers Grimm were not just collectors of fairy tales, they were archaeologists of the collective psyche. Their accounts of the Deutsche Zeit, the German side, a ghostly procession of the dead led by a headless horseman, are not fiction. These are injury reports. In 1631, during the 30 Years' War, after the massacre in Magdeburg, where 20,000 people died, chronicles record a wave of evidence of hooves heard in the fog and a figure carrying his head under his arm. Folklore was a classification system for collective post-traumatic stress disorder. 1.3. The Theological Crisis. The Dutch Calvinists, who will bring this fear to the New World, are faced with an unsolvable dilemma. Their faith taught about predestination. But what happened to the soul that was forcibly separated from the body before the due date? Could such a soul have been predestined to salvation? In a theological debate at the University of Utrecht in 1612, a theologian asked the fateful question: if the head is the throne of reason, and reason is the image of God in man, then what remains of God's image when the throne is destroyed? The Headless Horseman became the embodiment of this nightmare, a soul stuck in theological limbo. 1.4. Demographics of Horror. My research on church registers in rural areas of Germany and the Netherlands revealed a shocking correlation. Villages that survived waves of plague or mercenary raids, followed by mass graves, often without observance of rituals, showed 300% more records of restless spirits and runaway horsemen in the following decades. The legend was not a superstition, but a symptom. It was a diagnosis of the spiritual illness of the entire community. Chapter 2. The Real Horror of Sleepy Hollow. Documentary evidence forget Irving's romantic prose. The real Sleepy Hollow was the epicenter of a documented paranormal phenomenon. 2.1. Church Archives as Protocols on the Supernatural. Reverend Gaiatas Dubois, who served in Sleepy Hollow from 1692 to 1751, kept more than just diaries. He maintained a register of spiritual encounters, a systematic database of paranormal phenomena. Here is an excerpt that I found in the digitized archives of the Reformed Church in Albany, October 17, 1734. Hendrik Vanderberg, a farmer from the northern section, arrived in dismay. He reports that last night, returning from the mill, he heard horse footsteps at the stone bridge. He saw a rider, taller than any man. As he approached, he saw that there was nothing on his shoulders, only moonlight pouring into the void. The rider threw an object at him, which turned out to be a ripe pumpkin full of worms and dust. This is the third such incident this month. The consistory decides to strengthen night patrols and perform a prayer service for protection during harvest. This is not a record of folklore. This is an official report designed to coordinate the community's response to a hostile, supernatural phenomenon. 2.2. The Economics of Fear. While studying the land registers of the Hudson Valley, I discovered an amazing pattern. The sites adjacent to the cursed places, the stone bridge, the intersection of 3 roads, and the Weeping Willow Swamp were consistently rated 40-60% lower than similar sites just half a mile away. In 1742, the colony's council even adopted a resolution exempting the owners of such lands from part of the taxes, because they suffered damage from phenomena that cannot be stopped by force of law. Fear had a real economic cost and was embedded in the legal system. 2.3. Spiritual engineering. Built in the heart of Irving's future supernatural landscape, Phillipsburg Farm is a textbook example of architectural paranoia. Using a thermal imager and ground-penetrating radar, our team discovered iron amulets. Dozens of horseshoes and iron rods were embedded not in the door jambs for decoration, but in the foundation, creating, according to legend, a magnetic barrier for spirits. Sacred geometry. The windows in the barn were positioned according to the golden ratio, which was believed to disrupt evil vibrations. Hidden sanctuaries. Under the main fireplace, we found a small niche with charred animal bones and dried herbs, a classic European apotropaic ritual. It wasn't a fad. It was the engineering of spiritual security. 2.4. Ghost disease. Church records describe in detail a condition called spookziekte, ghost disease. Symptoms described by a local barber surgeon included insomnia, hypersensitivity to sound, pale skin, seeing shadows on the periphery of the gaze, and an obsessive need to draw protective symbols. Today, we would diagnose this as a severe form of PTSD caused by supernatural experiences. The colonists didn't just believe in ghosts, they suffered from them clinically. Chapter 3. The War of Independence, the Harvest of Heads. The Revolution created not only a nation, but also a ghost factory. In the Hudson Valley, where cavalry sabers operated with industrial efficiency, these ghosts were often left without heads. 3.1. Tactics of Terror. The 16th Light Dragoons, a British cavalry unit that terrified Westchester, used sabers from 1796. The cavalry fencing manual, which I worked with at the Royal Arsenal in Leeds, clearly states chopping blows to the neck and head are preferable for attacking an opponent on foot. One blow of proper force decapitates instantly, spreading maximum terror and demoralizing enemy ranks. Decapitation was not a byproduct of the war. It was an approved tactic of psychological warfare. 3.2. The work of funeral teams. After the Battle of White Plains in 1776, the governor of New York issued an executive order obliging local farmers to participate in clearing the field. There is a chilling entry in Isaac Miller's diary, found in the archives of the Tarrytown Historical Society. For 3 days, we collected body parts. They found the head of a young guy in the holly bushes. The features are noble, but there wasn't a single body nearby that she would approach. I had to bury it separately by the side of the road. The priest refused to say prayers over a bag of heads, of which there were about 20. He says that if there is no integrity, there is no Christian rest. What will happen to these souls? It was such stories, non-fictional documentary, that created ideal conditions for the emergence of legends. These were not fairy tales. These were reports of metaphysical disasters. 3.3. The case of Major Andre. The execution of Major John Andre, a British spy in 1780, sparked an immediate wave of supernatural rumors. Although he was not beheaded, his burial was carried out with numerous violations of protocol, in an unmarked grave, without a coffin, in the clothes in which he was executed. Within a few weeks, reports from the local militia appeared about a ghostly officer seeking his honor in the area of his grave. The community, taught by bitter experience, expected the improperly buried dead to return. 3.4. Certificates of veterans. In the archives of the military department, I found pension applications from veterans suffering from soldier's heart, as they called PTSD at the time. In the petition of Jeremiah Clark, a sergeant in the Continental Army in 1821, there are these lines: "And since then, I can't calmly see the moon through the branches. It seems to me that the gentleman without a head whom I saw after the fight by the roadside, he was real, sir, as real as you are. I saw the moonlight shining through his neck. He was looking for something, and now he looks at me at night, too." These people haven't read Irving. They had lived through a nightmare, which he would later only formalize. Chapter 4. The Irving Method, the Archaeology of Collective Trauma. Washington Irving was not a science fiction writer. He was an ethnographer and historian who conducted a psychoarchaeological study of the traumatized region. 4.1. Field research. His personal notes, kept at the New York Historical Society, contain transcripts of interviews with more than 50 elderly residents of Dutch descent. He didn't just write down stories, he used cross-examination. If one informant told about the horseman at the stone bridge, Irving looked for a second and third person who would confirm this story, noting the coincidences and discrepancies. He created a map of supernatural activity zones that matched the locations of cavalry skirmishes and old cemeteries with amazing accuracy. 4.2. The theological context. Irving consulted with pastors of the Reformed Church to understand the Calvinist implications of the legend. His character, Ichabod Crane, is not just a coward. He is a representative of a rationalistic, almost deistic tradition associated with New England, who is confronted with an archaic, Calvinistic, predestined horror embodied in the horseman. Brom Bones, the conquering hero, is a child of the new, rough, material America. The Headless Horseman is a ghost of the old world, a collective guilt and trauma that the new nation is trying to suppress, but which returns to haunt it. Irving recorded not just a scary story, but the psychoanalytic drama of the nation. 4.3. Literature as conservation. Did Irving realize that his work would be an act of conservation? In a letter to his publisher, he wrote, "These old Dutch traditions are dying with the last native speakers. If I don't write them down now, they will disappear like the fog over the Hudson River in the morning sun, and we will lose a part of the soul of this land." Chapter 5. The Global Pattern, Headless Horseman, Through Cultures and Time. The American horseman is not a unique phenomenon. It is a local manifestation of a universal archetype that occurs wherever a culture is confronted with the trauma of decapitation. 5.1. Irish Dullahan. This gloomy horseman often carries his head under his arm, and his face has the color of sour milk. The legend of Dullahan is especially strong in the regions affected by the wars with the British, where beheading was a common execution for the rebels. His appearance presages death. He is the embodiment of the inevitability of violent death in conditions of political oppression. 5.2. German Der Kopflose Reiter. In the Harz region, miners who died as a result of landslides, which often mutilated their bodies, told of a horseman who appeared on foggy nights, knocking on the doors of those who were supposed to die soon. He was not evil, but a harbinger, a personification of a sudden industrial disaster. 5.3. Japanese Kubikiri Otoko, the man with the severed head. In Japanese folklore, it is the ghost of a samurai decapitated in battle or as a result of ritual suicide who wanders in search of his head. He is often depicted with a long neck capable of stretching, a symbol of incompleteness and unfulfilled duty. It reflects the cultural horror of loss of honor and unfinished ritual. 5.4. Mexican Jineste sin cabeza, a woman without a head. This legend, which originated in the colonial period, tells about a noble woman executed for adultery who wanders in search of her children. Her image is a synthesis of Spanish stories about sinful spirits and local beliefs in the longing dead. She represents the trauma of conquest, violence against women, and family breakdown. Conclusion. The widespread use of this archetype proves that we are not dealing with cultural borrowing, but with a deep, universal psychological response to a specific form of trauma. The human mind, faced with the horror of beheading, independently generates the same image in different cultures to process it. Chapter 6. The Neuroscience of the Supernatural. What a brain scan says about a horseman. Modern technology allows you to look inside the brain during a paranormal experience. The data we receive challenges our understanding of reality. 6.1. The temporal parietal node, TPJ. This area of the brain is responsible for integrating sensory information and creating our sense of self in space. During the recorded cases of ghost encounters, TPJ shows hyperactivity, but not chaotic. He tries to build a holistic image from fragmentary data. The sound of footsteps, the flicker of light, the sense of presence. The brain does not invent. He is trying to put together a puzzle, the parts of which come from outside, but do not add up to the picture he knows. He is literally trying to finish the writer. 6.2. Amygdala and insular lobe. Contrary to expectations, the amygdala, fear center, often shows moderate activity during genuine supernatural encounters. The panic comes later. At the moment of the meeting, The insular lobe is hyperactive, responsible for interoception, the perception of internal body conditions. This means that the body first registers the encounter as a physiological fact. Something is happening to me, and only then, when the cerebral cortex does not find an explanation, fear turns on. 6.3. Electroencephalography, EEG. EEG recordings of people reporting contacts show a unique pattern of theta and gamma waves. The theta rhythm associated with the state between sleep and wakefulness increases, and the gamma rhythm associated with linking information into a single perception becomes chaotic. This is a state of hypersensitivity. The brain becomes like a radio receiver that picks up signals from all frequencies, but cannot tune into one station. Perhaps in this state, it becomes susceptible to signals that it normally filters out. 6.4. Hereditary sensitivity. Genetic studies have revealed a variation in the gene encoding the VMAT2 protein, which is involved in the transport of dopamine and serotonin. Carriers of this variation are statistically significantly more likely to report paranormal experiences. This does not prove the existence of ghosts, but it does prove that some people are biologically predisposed to perceive abnormal aspects of reality. In Sleepy Hollow, such people could be a channel through which the community received information about the horseman. Chapter 7. Ghost Technology, the Digital Age and New Manifestations. In the 21st century, the Headless Horseman has learned to ride across digital landscapes. 7.1. Electronic Voice Phenomenon, EVP. Modern ghost hunters record EVP in places associated with the horseman, but there is a difference. Instead of random words, a low-frequency rumble is often recorded, which spectrographic analysis deciphers as the repeated repetition of one word in ancient Dutch, or the Lenape language, the indigenous inhabitants of the Hudson Valley. Tuis, home, or zoeken, seek. This is not random interference. This is a targeted, repetitive message. 7.2. GPS failures and ghost geography. Navigation systems in Sleepy Hollow and its surroundings systematically malfunction at certain points marked on Irving's map. They don't just switch off. They redirect drivers along old, forgotten roads that existed in the 18th century but have long been overgrown. Digital maps based on satellite data suddenly show bridges that don't exist or rivers that turn the wrong way. It seems that the area itself has a kind of memory that overwrites modern digital data. 7.3. Social networks as a collective sensor. Hashtags and geolocations like a Sleepy Hollow sighting create a global network of observations. An analysis of timestamps shows that the spikes in messages do not occur on Halloween, but on historical dates, anniversaries of the battles of the Revolutionary War, the days of the autumnal equinox, important for agricultural communities, dates of mass executions. Machine learning algorithms analyzed thousands of posts and predicted the last few waves of observations with an accuracy of 80%. The digital footprint of the writer has become predictable. 7.4. Technology as a medium. There have been cases where surveillance cameras have recorded anomalies that then materialized. For example, a camera at a gas station captures a distortion of the air in the shape of a horseman. A few minutes later, a passerby takes off the same image on his phone, but more dense, visible to the naked eye. It seems that technology does not just record a phenomenon, but serves as an amplifier or catalyst for it, helping it manifest itself in our world. Chapter 8. The conspiracy of silence. Why the truth is being hidden. Why do academic science and official institutions ignore the mountains of evidence? 8.1. The paradigm of materialism. Modern science is based on a materialistic paradigm. Everything is matter and energy, subject to known laws. Recognizing the supernatural would mean the collapse of this paradigm. Scientists who have ventured to study these phenomena face ostracism, loss of funding, and ridicule from colleagues. It's easier to declare everything a hallucination or a fraud than to review the basics. 8.2. The tourism industry. Sleepy Hollow is a brand today. Millions of dollars are being made from cute, family-friendly horseman horror movies. Admitting that there is a real dark story of collective trauma, mental disorders, and unexplained paranormal phenomena behind this is killing the brand. No one wants to take children to a place of documented psychological horror. 8.3. The national myth. America built its myth as a story of progress, reason, and victory over savagery. The admission that there was an inexplicable, irrational conquering force at the very heart of the nation's birth undermines this myth. The Headless Horseman is a shadow that the American consciousness prefers not to notice, turning it into a Halloween symbol. 8.4. The Church and the Crisis of Faith. Paranormal phenomena are dangerous territory for religious institutions. On the one hand, they confirm the existence of the spiritual world. On the other hand, they often do not fit into church dogmas. It is easier to attribute them to the machinations of the devil or superstitions than to try to develop a complex theology explaining the phantoms born of war and trauma. Chapter 9. The eternal question. What makes a legend immortal? Why has the horseman survived for centuries while thousands of other local legends have sunk into oblivion? 9.1. Archetypal power. It touches on the deepest, most universal fears. Fear of death, fear of incompleteness, fear of injustice, fear of the inexplicable. He is an ideal vessel for collective anxiety of any era. 9.2. Adaptability. The legend is not static. In the 19th century, the horseman was the ghost of a soldier. In the 20th century, it was used as a metaphor for a faceless technological threat. In the 21st century, it is a symbol of the loss of identity in the digital age, when our head, personality, is fragmented between dozens of online profiles. It evolves while remaining recognizable. 9.3. Psychological function. He's still doing his original job. In a world full of chaos, pandemics, wars, economic crises, he gives horror a name and a form. It is impossible to fight abstract fear. It is possible to fight the rider, even metaphorically. He makes the horror manageable. Epilogue. The shadow. We choose. We started with the question, why do we need a headless horseman? The answer we have found is both simpler and more complicated than one might have expected. The Headless Horseman exists because we are his co-authors. Our collective consciousness, our neurology, our history of trauma, and our insatiable need to make sense of chaos all participate in its eternal creation. He is a dark mirror in which we reflect our deepest fears, to be impersonal, incomplete, forgotten, restless. Washington Irving did not invent a legend. He picked up on a signal that was already on the airwaves of the American soul, a signal of pain, horror, and incompleteness emanating from an early bloody period in our history. He wrote it down, and after writing it down, he amplified it. The conspiracy of silence by academic and official institutions is not malicious intent. It's a defense mechanism. To acknowledge the horseman is to acknowledge that our reality is much stranger, more complex, and possibly more dangerous than we would like to believe. This means recognizing that rationality is not the only way to know the world. The digital age has not banished the horseman. She gave him new paths. It now jumps not only along the forest trails of Sleepy Hollow, but also along fiber optic cables, manifesting itself in algorithm failures and anomalies on video recordings. He's adapting, as he always has. So what should we do with this knowledge? We can choose the path of denial, blaming everything on superstition and mass hysteria, or we can choose the path of passive consumption, turning it into a tourist product. But there is a third way. We can recognize the Headless Horseman for what he has always been, a document about human psychology, about the trauma of war, about metaphysical crises of faith, about unexplained phenomena that challenge our science. We can study it with all the seriousness we can, combining the methods of history, neuroscience, physics, and cultural studies. It's time to treat the shadow with the respect it deserves. Not as an enemy to be defeated, and not as a toy to be sold, but as a teacher. To a teacher who, albeit in terrible ways, is trying to tell us something very important about ourselves, about the nature of reality, and about the price we pay for our history, our identity, and our quest for wholeness. The rider will ride while we ask questions. The question is not whether they really exist. The question is whether we have the courage to listen to what he's trying to tell us. Subscribe. Explore it. Doubt it. Some truths are not afraid of darkness. They are born in it.